Hey everyone, welcome to Poetry Goes Viral on Carolina Poets, an event usually hosted by Kimberly Sims and Andrew K. Clark every second and fourth Thursday at 7 p.m. As you might have observed already, I am neither of these people. My name is Eric Tran, and I am a poet living in Asheville, North Carolina, and I've had the honor of reading with Carolina Poets previously. And I was invited by Kimberly and Andrew to curate and host a special reading in celebration of API Heritage Month. And I'm excited to be here with you today. I'm going to talk just a little bit longer for you all to get onto the stream. We are currently multicasting, which is such a lovely portmanteau, which makes you think that we're wizards of some sort. But we are multicasting onto Facebook and YouTube under the name Carolina Poets for our celebration of API Heritage Month. I'm excited to be here for a good number of reasons. One specifically being that this has been obviously a very tough time and challenging time for API folks. And then added on top of that is I think a lot of us have been, I can't speak for all of us, but a lot of us have been a little bit worried about then having to represent an entire culture for API Heritage Month. It is a very well-meaning time that I think can often be tokenizing. But I think that we can also use the time to really celebrate people who are striking very individual voices to show that the identity is indeed heterogeneous and multifaceted. And what better way to do that than through poetry that resists sort of a single definition or a single line of thinking. So I'm very excited to introduce the readers to you today, many of whom I hope you already know, or if you don't, now you have new favorite poets to read. I'll introduce them individually, but to give you a bigger overview, we will feature Ae Hee Lee, Joshua Nguyen, and Jessica Q. Stark, and then we'll have a short conversation at the end. I'll introduce our first poet, Ae Hee Lee. I was introduced to her work pretty recently because she won the Frost Place Chapbook contest through Bull City Books, judged by Tiana Clark. And while the book is not available yet, I then went to go read her other poems. And one of the lines that really struck me is from a poem called Self-Portrait as Portrait. And it reads, "You, I suspect, were made tentatively, exact assemblage of organs, emotions." And that's the feeling that I really get from Ae's work. There's another poem called Bong Sung-ae, Impatient Balsam, that starts, "Monsoon in Busan, garden balsams plump with rain." And that kind of precision with her sounds there, with the music of the words, is also then reflected in the structures of the poems themselves. Every single word, which is to say also every single breath, is so meticulously placed in her poems, tentative perhaps, but exact. And yet for the exactness, creates a multitude of meanings all at once. And while I was reading her poems, I had this very precise sense of calm, but also of an opening, which I really admire in poetry and in her work in particular. For a more formal bio, before she comes on to read, born in South Korea and raised in Peru, Ae Hee Lee currently lives in Milwaukee. She's the author of 2 poetry chapbooks, Dear Bear through Platypus Press and Bedtime, Riverbed through Compound Press. Most recently, her work, Connotary, was selected as the winner for the 2021 Frost Place Chapbook by Tiana Clark. She holds an MFA from the University of Notre Dame, where she was awarded an Academy of American Poets Prize, and a PhD in Literature and Creative Writing from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Her poetry has been published or is forthcoming at the Georgia Review, New England Review, Southern Review, and elsewhere. And without further ado, Ae Hee.
Hello. Thank you, Eric, for those lovely words and just your kind comments, kind reading of my poems. I'm really excited to be here tonight and to read. I'll be reading some poems from my forthcoming chapbook, Connotary, and just a little bit of background. Connotary is a word I made up, and it mixes the word connotation and dictionary, and I wanted this series of poems to translate words in my life into personal connotations instead of general definitions. So this first poem is called Korea, as things to review before landing. Korea, as things to review before landing. Number one, my origin story. My mother found me as a chestnut dangling from a tree. When I fell onto her lap, she was eating a copper pear with one hand, paging through a book with the other. She carried out the burr in the hollow of her arms. The spiny cupule made her bleed, but she didn't let go until I broke out from the shell. Later, I sprouted needles anew, afraid I was being nibbled away by the world. Number two, my grandfather's name. I thought my grandfather's name was Haraboji, only to find out it was the Korean word for grandfather. He was the one who taught me and my sister to sail a paper kite over a frozen river to allow my index to flirt with its mercurial tail. Number three, an idiom. When I was given a norige accessory to hang under my first hanbok jacket, I foresaw a pendulous love in my life. I alternated between laughing and sobbing. Short horns appeared on my back. From then on, a childlike misfortune took the shape of a blank page and muffled my steps in every new country I called home. I didn't want her at first, but eventually grew fond of her, held her hand when she cried at night. Number four, a road. The one I took to school when I lived in Changyu for that one year. I studied the occasional bush of forsythias on the side, prodding yellow against an absolute autumn sky. Next poem is called Hue as In Between. At all sides, the trains slip away from us. My sister and I played red light, green light, but with eyes closed and singing instead. The Hibiscus syriacus has bloomed again. Our mother glances at the platform clock, and us, as we practice the art of climbing stairs, slowly anoint each step with the shadows of scissors, wolves, shapeshifters we call hands. It's a quiet and passionate affair to dwell in the meanwhile, with a waiting so bright red like the beads of jujube fruits our grandmother used to dry out in the yard so they would amass all the sweetness of the world in their little bodies. She taught me nothing is wasted in waiting, and to be grateful for the sun which won't ever hurry. Years after she's no longer with us, I hum 무궁화 꽃이 피었습니다, and a train nuzzles the station as it arrives, arrives, and arrives. Um, the poem I'm going to read now is titled Trujillo as Homecoming. And I just want to clarify that Trujillo is the town in Peru I grew up in until I went to college in the US. And the person who appears in this poem, Alejandra, is the name of my childhood friend. So, Trujillo as Homecoming. Alejandra welcomes me back to our first home. Her arms, wide ferns, her fingers, wispy fronds curling towards me, towards a small sun blushing on my cheek. She puckers her lips to greet the wind which sings secretly close to my ear. Alejandra welcomes me back, and my heart stutters. I don't remember whether to turn my face left or right. I whisper, "It's okay. It's not mine." For there to be sorrow in forgetting how to cross through gaps now filled with gossamer veils of time. Quinchana, está bien, for people to become strangers to their own bodies, question why absences insist on weaving something new. Alejandra welcomes me back. So I go, receive her beso. I am furled deeper into green under the embrace of lush, unfamiliar arms. Um, this poem is called Kimchi, as in Trujillo. My mother and her wooden cooking spoon, a pot filled with water and an ambiguous amount of all-purpose flour instead of rice flour. She stirs, the water turns milky, it turns thicker, stickier, the smell of starch dissipates into the air. It occurs to me that my mother's arm is an orbiting moon, unable to escape the gravity of a planet much larger than herself. My mother with salt on the palm of her hand, her arm extending towards a ray of noon. She compares the Peruvian salt to another memory. This unfamiliar salt in front of her eyes is a thinner crystal. She licks her fingers. It's slightly sour. She asks me to come and have a taste, but I have nothing to compare it with yet. My mother slicing onions, spring onions, radishes into whatever size she thinks would be a pleasure to eat. My mother's measuring tool, her intuition, her philosophy that a fixation with perfection deters one from pouring chong into the food. Chong, she teaches me, is love that comes with time, similar to the process of fermentation, similar to the slow dying of brined leaves. My mother's concave back as she squats over the blue rim of a plastic tub in the laundry room. The Napa cabbages inside are as wide as my childish hips, rare in Trujillo, rare like the Korean pepper flakes my mother has been saving up by mixing them with ají panca. The translucent plastic gloves covering her hands are smeared with bright candy red and the green of spring onions. She tells me to go sleep first. I dream of her, hands carefully running between the cabbage leaves, even today, half a continent away, making sure no white spot is left untouched. Um, this next poem was born from all the times I would return to the US through Chicago, the O'Hare Airport, to continue my studies. It's called Chicago as Re-Entry Ritual. I've become an expert at packing exactly 50 pounds worth of breadcrumbs. The luggage, the head I unload mid-flight. I leave a snowy trail over the Pacific. The fish swallow my way back, but I know the tail will remain. Upon landing, I look back, my eyes crust with salt. I wander through the labyrinth of customs, praying for a safe passage in a mixed tongue. What's the purpose of your visit? They ask. What's the purpose of me? I ask and answer myself. To be reunited with love, waiting at every side of a border, To consider a country isn't a womb, though a womb can be a country. To carry the migrant dust on my limbs, the remnant skin cells from people who embraced me goodbye, to let them weigh my hems, to die like a kiss, like a candle to a kiss, at each point of entry, rename my departures into returns. Um, Naturalization as migration. At a pottery sale, I buy nothing, only consider this turquoise ribbed vase baked into a glass of rivers, slightly slanted to the left. So cheap, perhaps a uniqueness mistaken for a mistake. I'm convinced of its fragility, its ceramic pelvis, the space it would take up in the immigration bag my parents passed down to me, dark foldable closet I've dragged from country to country. When I was younger, I orphaned many books. Now I just carry this guilt, a longing for roots, a garland of delicate hair seeping slowly into soil, into vase. But I'm no perennial green. I have feet, eager to get naked, moved by the seasons not here yet. They ask me to chase their undulating animal dreams. And since it's spring now, I'll also read like a spring poem that I wrote a while back. It's called Midwest as Equinox. For most of my life, I slept by the music of sand dunes shifting near along. But today I wake up, spot a snowflake melting into the window's glass. I think I'll never grasp the true width of the world, because even this land is a trickster, bidding the ivory humps of winter leviathans to thaw into strings of water, scurry to make a sea out of a sloping garden. I hurry outside. I witness the way a warm whisper rouses children of tiny green fingers. So for this next poem, I want to share a small fun fact. The bougainvillea is a bushy tree of flowers that's called different things across Latin America. And in Trujillo, we call them papelillos, which literally translates as paperlings. So the title of this poem is Bougainvillea as Papelillos. Alejandra says she doesn't believe in discovery, only in encounters, and that she wants to introduce me to a bougainvillea bush down the street. She leads us past white window gates from colonial times that look like ornate bird cages, and I don't ask out loud whether a single dust particle has remained in place since I left Trujillo years ago. She points, smiling. Look, the branches of papelillos are over there, hugging the sky. They are the color of our mornings here, of light shivering in fog, busy with petals that are not petals, but leaves holding invisible flowers. We don't stand too close. We don't interrupt the rustle of paper houses above our heads. We wait under the lattice shade, stay still to understand what it means to sway. Madrugada as small hours. 6:03 a.m. An unripe sunlight percolates through air, canopy of oak, window and yellow curtain into my living room. It must have been a day like this, the birth of a word, the word an offering, hatching within a fertile mind. the instance a small god many have beheld at least once, a large jellyfish with the body of an unraveling clementine passing through. The house billows. Luminous cells skip across the walls, and even the gray couch gleams, flecks of morning made crescent with the shadow of leaf. And to end, I'll read this short poem that's based on a Korean pun. The poem is called Shijo, as genealogy. My father liked to tease with an old pun, saying he found me under the tari, the arc of my mother's tari, her splayed legs. I felt fortunate to be called the daughter of a bridge. Thank you.
Wow. Um, I don't know if you probably weren't looking at the chat, but we are hyping you the fuck up. Which I think is a good compliment from other poets. Just the starting line, and I was still processing. My mother found me as a chestnut, and then the ending line. I'm proud to be the daughter of a bridge. Like holy moly, how can I even think about that?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for letting me be here and read.
So I'm going to introduce our next poet. He is someone who I think this is celebratory to think that I would know all the queer Vietnamese poets, and yet there's always more to know, which I think is always a splendid thing. I first heard about him on the Versus podcast with Franny Choi and Dinesh Smith. And I was really taken by his approach for using formal Vietnamese forms in a new way. His book is also through Bull City Press. It's a chapbook, which I don't think you can read this. It's American Lookbot from my mother. Joshua also has the probably my favorite approach to pandemic book publication or publicizing. He walked through several of my favorite Vietnamese recipes as it shows up in his chapbook. There's two lines I wanted to introduce you all to. The first one is called Store Overnight American Lukbak. Marinate means patience, means fish sauce soaking in between leftover pinto beans. So it already has this sort of, cooking theme to it. And then a later poem reads, a failed American Lukebot responds. And the line reads, how much of me must be written before I am just another bastardized item? So at the same time that this book relishes in taste and sensory and the cultural, it also has a lot of restlessness and a lot of anger and a lot of resentment. And I'm excited to have Joshua here, because I think that pretty much sums up a lot of my at least current feelings as an API person right now. I'm also excited to introduce you all to his work, or maybe if you already know him, bring him more into your lives. His formal bio reads, Josh Nguyen is a bisexual Vietnamese American writer, a collegiate National Poetry Slam champion, and a native Houstonian. He is the author of the chapbook American Loopback from My Mother from Bull City Press, and has received fellowships from Kundiman, Tin House, Sundress Academy of the Arts, and the Vermont Studio Center. He's been published in The Offing, Wildness, American Poetry Review, The Texas Review, Auburn Avenue, Crab Orchard Review, and Gulf Coast Mag. He has been featured on both the Versus podcast and Tracy K. Smith's The Slowdown. He is a bubble tea connoisseur and works in the kitchen. His debut poetry collection, which I think we just found out about very recently, Come Clean, through the University of Wisconsin Press, was the winner of the 2021 Felix Pollock Prize in Poetry. He is a PhD student at the University of Mississippi, where he also received his MFA. And without further ado, Joshua Nguyen.
This is for Eric. Marinate means patience. Means fish sauce soaking in between leftover pinto beans that the customer beans back in with that kitchen, with that lean white mom Sunday brunch mean temper. It means, oh, come ye old tempura still in the back of the fridge. Come time, come soak, come slog, come wet, come brown, come all, come spice, come quicker, come rice. Come thick slice of enticing, come my love, my joy, please come. When you're ready to come, please come. Thank you for that, a very touching introduction, Eric. When you read the first two lines of that of Store Over, and I was like, oh, I gotta read this poem. This is a good opening poem. And it was kind of like a group poem almost, because you read the first few lines and then I finished it out. But yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be reading with Jessica and Ae. And it's cool because I read Ae's work because I'm the social media coordinator for Yalabusha Review, and Ae was a recent contributor to Yalabusha Review. So I was like hyping up Ae's work on our social media. So it's a really cool connection that we get to read together now. But yeah, this is my chapbook, my little mixtape from Bull City Press, and the lukbat, it's a traditional Vietnamese form, and I learned about it and studied it after a conversation with my parents eating 7-course beef in Asia Town in Houston. It was the first time that I had a long conversation about literature with my parents, and especially with my dad. And the thing is, he reads every dinner time. Like we don't talk much at dinner, but when he reads his Vietnamese books, and most of them are in the lukbat form. So this whole time there's like this connection waiting to be bridged. And so when I researched the form and studied it and tried to write it, I adapted it to the English language, because English is polysyllabic and Vietnamese isn't. So really this chapbook is an attempt to bridge, me with a literary tradition of a culture that I'm always trying to get close with. It's also a way to bridge my relationship with my parents, in a small, I guess, literary way. So I'm gonna read 2 American lukbats back to back. And yeah, the first one is add coconut water. Also, shout out to Eric seeing me. Yeah, I took over Bull City Press's Twitter, and I literally made a tik call, my favorite Vietnamese dish, and I did step by step, and it was very fun. All right. Add coconut water. This can be bought or found in the tree in the ground of your living room, the one your aunt planted years before you were born. A seed that gave birth to a legacy worth each bruised palm from each time you lose your grip and fall to roots or feet, bare feet, black and treated with sun. Yes, the tree trunk can move depending on whoever needs a fresh coconut in the family. Bow as it walks steadily into your kitchen. Free the knife from your hand and grab tight around its body. Kite your way up and shimmy your weight towards the crown. At the highest point holds the juiciest amount of furry coconuts. The best part of this heartwood quest is how, with your left arm holding the ingredients in place, you will get down. Marinate using fish sauce. When I open the brand new bottle, the new management burns down the door. You can't use that here. You have caught the next door neighbors in a hex. And I see them bear witness through their nostrils. They're not used to this tingle, this tooth that wiggles above their tongues. They fall and dissolve. In the hall, they shout, kick, beg for mercy out to white angels who part the sky in half for rain to cry its cleanse unto July. To wash away the fresh fish sauce from my lips. Let me hawk and spit vicious tang on my shit neighbors. I will sip one last gurgle and break the flask of Viet potion fast against the ground. Witness a hole burn the floor in the way I start to season a dish and their mouths will flay open. So yeah, that video thread on Bull City Press was for tikal, my favorite Vietnamese dish, and a lot of the lukbats in the chapbook are steps to make tikal. So I'll read the opening poem. And it's after my favorite dish, which you already know because I've said it 2 times. I just want to reiterate that. This is tikal. Miles away, I forget to peel the eggs the night before. Miles away, I forget to buy the special brand of coconut juice. Miles away, my mother is laughing once I swallow my pride and call. It'll never be quite the same, she says. Just try your best and finish your food. When you buy fish sauce, you must remember to wrap it in newspaper. If the bottle breaks in the car, the stench will haunt you long after the car is compacted. She tells me that it's okay to cry because the eggs still aren't hard enough. I am blessed to have a mother who talks about death, who knows her mortality. I imagine my mother's passing. I know she won't have enough grandchildren. I will have added too much pepper, not enough oyster sauce. It's called simmering for a reason. The house smells of coconut. Braised pork and hot rice, rice cleaned thoroughly. Between the sounds of the blue flame lies an emulsified telephone cord. Our recipes will never quite be the same, but we both wear gloves to peel our eggs. When I cook for my mother, I know she will lie. All right, I'm gonna switch things up. I'm gonna read a couple of poems from my forthcoming debut poetry collection, Come Clean, of University of Wisconsin Press. It comes out October 5th. So October 5th, keep your fingers ready to buy the book. I'm gonna start off pretty heavy, and then we'll get lighter and lighter. This first poem is called Bunk Bed, and it's a heavy poem, so content warning. The second stanza pretty much mentions sexual assault. So if you need to leave the room or mute the computer for a minute or two, go ahead. So yeah, this is called Bunk Bed. And I think Come Clean, what it does is I try to, the book is a lot about like the domestic and the quotidian and how that influence how I compartmentalized, my upbringing and a lot of the trauma growing up that went unsaid. So I've never read this poem out loud, I think. So I think I'm also doing it to be cathartic. So yeah, this is Bunk Bed. The first time I heard what sex sounded like, besides my parents at night when I would tiptoe downstairs to sneak out a piece of toast, butter, and some sugar, was when I visited my brother during his freshman year of college. My brother, who didn't call himself a player, but said he just wanted to have crushes on girls a lot. My brother, who wanted me to have the true college experience and have me sleep in his apartment in West Campus during rush week, while he was in the living room being beautiful and sinking the last cup on the ping pong table. My 8-year-old self was staring at the bottom of the top bunk, its plastic blue stained with something yellow, the springs corroded, the mattress tag ripped in two. The springs began to oscillate towards me. Heavy breathing threaded the dusty comforter hanging off the sides. 2 lovers, who won't see each other again, lectured me on lust and silence, on observation and stillness, how to be under heat and not be afraid when the tension comes closer and closer towards you. The first time tension became too close, it was hot and I was afraid. She told me to be still and to just observe. She lectured me, saying I could rape you if I wanted to, my legs dangling off of the bottom bunk, my breath oscillating between heavy and spring. It was in a dorm room during a poetry festival. The mattress was old, ripped in two. My yellow 13-year-old self staring at the springs above. How I envied the emptiness of the bunk up high. Her teammates in the other room being beautiful, and yelling through the door to get some. Her teammates wanted us to have true experience, told her to crush it like I was part of some game, said, I'm teaching you to have game. She tried to get my number, said if I lied that I would be toast, her nails caramelized into my clavicle, her weight pinning the tips of my toes. The first time I had sex, it wasn't even sex. It's all oral, baby, she said, while I pressed my right thigh against the cold wall, looking to disperse heat. The first time I had oral sex, it sounded nothing like my parents. Thank you for letting me read that. This next poem is another quick switch, more lighthearted. This is a high bun. Shout out to Amy Nizuki-Motaro, my mentor, my thesis advisor, who loves high buns and encouraged me to write them. And this is called One Night with Stan. Yes, we can go back to my place. Yes, let's beat old fashioned. Let's take a cab. Yes, this is where I live. Yes, I live alone. Yes, you can come inside. Sorry, my place is a mess. No, you're being too kind. My place is usually more spotless than this. Yes, can you take off your shoes if you don't mind? Yes, feel free to have a drink. Help yourself. No, sorry, do you mind using a coaster? Yes, I'm one of those coaster type people. Yes, that's a picture of my parents. Yes, I can put on some slow jams. No, Alexa, John Legend, not John Lennon. Yes, now where were we? No, I do like dirty talking. Yes, you can take off my Henley. No, well, hold on. You threw it too close to the trash can. Yes, well, I don't like the idea of my clothes as trash. Yes, sorry, I'm almost done folding my shirt. No, I don't think we're moving too fast. Yes, we can kiss against the wall. Yes, we can foreplay on the... Well, let me put a sheet I put over my bed for when I'm dirty. Yes, exactly. So my dirtiness doesn't contaminate my clean sheets. No, you're right. I'm ruining the mood. Yes, I want you to ruin me. No, you can grab my neck. No, I'm totally fine with it as long as you washed your hands. Yes, I'm joking. I'm just joking. Yes, I know you went to the bathroom at the restaurant. No, I'm not implying you didn't wash your hands, although you technically did touch like 3 doors on the way here. No, I'm just saying we touched a lot of things today. Yes, I'll be right there. Yes, we can talk in the morning. No, I have to shower first. This next poem is towards the end of the book. So a lot of the threads in Come Clean, I talk about like the idea of being clean and organizing and such, and I do think that there is, a deeper nuance conversation about like the idea of hoarding. And I think when people maybe like, when my parents come over from Vietnam or, I think there's the idea that like you come over with nothing. And so you kind of gravitate and hold on to what you can. One, memories of belongings of things. I think there is like, I do sense there is like a privilege in me to be like, no, throw away this, this is too messy. And I think I wanted to make sure that towards the end of the book that I give basically the characters and like the voices that I talk about in the book to be able to respond, to talk back to me, the writer. So this poem is called Hoarder. We left everything so you could have everything. Now we have some things, you want us to have nothing? Your old trophies, relics, proof you tried to make us proud. Our jade at the bottom of a boat, capsized by salt. Our first couch swept by a flood they said couldn't happen in a no-flood zone. Your father and I gathered our urns we collected and tied them to the boat and called it an anchor and called it grounded and called it land ho, home of the free-range farms filled with meat we never have to kill ourselves. I could have been the wife of a general, could have lived in decadence, a fresh crab meat pre-picked apart, but my mother latched onto an idea of independence. clawed onto the image of America, the sponsor, the savior, not the safer. There are pearls in the ground next to my nieces, argon anklets, necklaces touched by napalm, rings with black nail residue. There are no space for trinkets or tombs. The dead is a permanence more fit for forever frills. Only room for pockets filled with dragonflies. Just dirty forearms and touches by soldiers and your grandmother. You can clear out your childhood bedroom. I'll still find the permanent marker behind the paint. But you leave our attic alone. A mouth, a stomach, cardboard boxes of paper cuts and newspapered porcelain. You leave our attic as is, or else I'll tear open your belly button, store my gray hairs in there, along with your father's fishing pole, and of course our tongues. I'll open you up. I'll use a dragonfly as a key. Mitski, shout out to Mitski, is a big influence on Come Clean, the book. So much so that I use some of her lyrics from her song Last Words of a Shooting Star as section epigraphs. And I had to contact Mitski's manager and ask for permission. So technically I own rights to one of Mitski's songs, which is that kind of cool thing to think about and a cool way to support your favorite musician.
It looks like we just lost Josh for a second, but here he is. I'm going to bring him back onto the screen.
Sorry about that. I think I mentioned Mitski, and she was like, why are you putting my name in your mouth? You aren't worthy of mentioning me. But yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so I had this whole cento using Mitski song titles, and then I realized how expensive that would be to put in a book. So I had to scrap it. But I rewrote pretty much a reprise of that cento. And I call it an extended cento because it's still in couplets, and the first line of each couplet is like from the Mitski song, Last Words of a Shooting Star. And then the second line of each couplet is an original line from me. But the last couplet are both lines from the song. So this is called Last Words, Extended Cento, after Mitski. When they come for my things, there will be a note left on my pillow. I was going to live for all my cotton tees, folded all the same. Like, did you know the Liberty Bell is a replica? How it shines its crack quietly. I inched away, silently housed in these original walls until I became beneath the primer. They'll never know how I stared at the dark in the room. But I watched my made bed every single morning that I couldn't have changed. No matter how smattered my insides, I am relieved that I left my room tidy, one less ugly sight. I always wanted to die clean and pretty, while my dreams made music in the night. So before my last poem, just want to say thank you to Kimberly, to Eric for hosting, for A, for Jessica. Shout out to Jessica. I can't wait to hear your work. Thank you for Caroline Poets. Thank you to Mitski and for reminding me how powerful you are, and for cutting me out for mentioning your name, Mitski. I hope we can be friends one day. I'm gonna read the second poem that Eric referenced in the introduction. Because, when I was writing American Lukbat for my mother, I did think about how and what it means for me as a Vietnamese American to kind of, adapt this traditional form to the English language. And it was like a very, American thing for me to do, right? To contort the rules for the English language. And I think that kind of sums up my internal struggle, right? Of trying to create a bridge, and respect traditions, but also to create new ways of thinking and new ways of connecting with, my Vietnamese heritage. So this is called A Failed American Lukbat Responds. How much of me must be written before I am just another bastardized item? My accents will soon leave the letters to float away across another ocean. Find them in Texas or Mississippi. Find them under outstretched tongues, broken down by enzymes, spit, and fast food. A form can starve to death, you know. If the libraries burn, who will think of me? How many queries until I find home? A Grecian urn devoid of my ashes, can I burn enough ink for you? Can be read from fathers who don't speak, who find love in Vietnamese fantasy, in warriors trying to find their way home. Oh, monosyllabic birthplace, can I self-colonize myself? Be the fusion the world doesn't want to see. It is written, therefore it exists in a third generation. The father's father, the author, and now me. In between self-hatred and self-actualization, I exist, so who will abandon me first? Who will shun me beneath the floorboards, you or myself? The author or the border? The home broken by war or the broken home by the bayou? Shake the soul out of me. Yellow secret blending in with all the carbon, suckle slurped, whispered, and incensed by the head knee mourners. A mother will not ask what happened. Instead, she will take the white headband at my funeral and burn it with incense until the Holy Ghost cries shame. Thank you.
Wow, Josh, I'm caught in this place of being, totally speechless and then wanting to say so many things. Our reaction backstage was like a lot of snapping and like, yeah, get after it. I think I've neglected to mention that this chapbook is also incredibly fucking sexy. Just the poem that you opened with, please come when you're ready to come, please come. And a lot of me was saying, yes, I'm let's embody that sexiness. And then, a part of me was later like just clutching my chest and saying like, yes, there's also like a lot of violence that we experience too. I wrote down something that you said of, get rid of this. This is too messy. And that could also be said about our experiences. But, I think what your poetry is showing us is the messiness, if you will allow me to call it that, is where a lot of the beauty lies and a lot of the truth lies. To pick up on your theme of cooking and creating, whatever it is that you make, whether you think it's messy or not, I want it. Our last reader for tonight is someone very special to me. Our books came out at the same time. And every time I hear her read, I have this sort of like really giddy reaction that I imagine that I'll have when I finally see my family again after a long quarantine or a long time apart. And I'm really excited for her to be here. Jessica Q. Stark is the author of Savage Pageant, which came out earlier this year through Birds LLC, was a bestseller on the small press distribution list. And the poem I wanted to highlight for you all today is Savage Pageant, Jungle Land, and Had Many Names. And it opens up with a line, and now we are carving mythology out of unremembered time. And I want you to hold that line in your head because this book is unlike any other book I've read before. It is at once, of course, a book of poetry. I also would say a book of essays and a history book and a picture book as well, because there's lots of wonderful illustrations in it. And it goes to the history of Jungle Land, which includes everything from colonizers to slavery to famous movie star actresses to the first female lion tamer. And at the end, it comes across this poem that says, now we're carving mythology out of remembered time, and then has the audacity to say the recurrent dream about Jungle Land isn't about tigers or Mabel, the lion tamer, or a roster of poorly behaving men, and creates this whole book about the legend of this place and says, no, that's not what we're talking about here. And of course, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about belonging. We're talking about the human need for ownership. We're talking about the human destiny of failure and the tragedy and then inherent love within it. When I first read this book, it was about the same time that Tiger King came out, and I could not finish that series because I found it so cynical and so flat. And I texted Jessica after I finished saying that this felt like the antidote to The Tiger King. And even if you love that show, I recommend that you read this book because it will change you. In a more formal bio, Jessica Q. Stark is a poet and educator living in Jacksonville, Florida. She's the author of 4 poetry chapbooks, including most recently Internet, through the Offending Adam Press. Her full-length collection, Savage Pageant, was published by Birds LLC in March of 2020 and was named one of the best poetry books of 2020 in the Boston Globe and in Hyperallergic. Her poems have appeared in or forthcoming in The Boiler, The Southeast Review, Pleiades, Poetry Daily, Carolina Quarterly, Wildness, Up the Staircase Quarterly, Hobart Pulp, Glass Poetry Journal, among others. She is very recently, congratulations to her, the poetry editor for Agni and the comic editors for Honey Literary. She teaches writing at the University of North Florida. Welcome to Jessica.
Hey, thank you. Oh my gosh, Eric, that was so kind. What a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much. I am such an admirer of your work, so it's ditto on a lot of what you said. Thank you for those kind words. And thank you to the Carolina Poets. Thank you to the fellow readers. What an honor to share this space with you. I was gonna kind of describe Savage Pageant before reading just one poem from it, but I'm just gonna add on to what Eric said, in that in addition to sort of being about this kind of spectacle of place, it was very much written as an address to my son before he was born. I wrote it during my pregnancy with him. And in short, I really wanted to provide, through this book, a map of undoing a world that is occasionally sharp and cruel, and to undo, or at least address, my own trepidation about bringing a child onto this planet. So I'll read a titular poem from this book. It has several, and then I'll move into new work. And this one's called Savage Pageant, 33 Weeks, and it's dedicated to the only animal that escaped jungle land, a black panther. Labor, noun. 1, productive activity, especially for the sake of economic gain. 2, the body of persons engaged in such activity, especially those working for wages. 3, this body of persons considered as a class distinguished from management and capital. Savage Pageant. Last week, I felt your hiccups for 3 days straight. This week, unknown. A collection of impulses, this savage page. I paid to sit with a circle of strangers to feel more prepared, and one woman cries. I feel my eyes roll and I curl into another language. I am obsessed with hiding my own nakedness. The body on display, a public domain of choices made, a needle, a drink of sugar, the sun going down when I rise. Is it madness to have you? Elephants breaking the main water line. There are things I'd like to tell you before you are born, like, don't ever sit in circles with strangers. Like, you don't always have to be in motion to survive. Like, the human heart is capable of making the head feel very small, and the last tissue I'll give you before giving you away to the clock and the stars is a simple one. Already, you are part of the air, and this end will not summarize forever. Stay static for a time. Hold on to the slippery pole of hearsay, rumor, these legends. Even if they are stones, they are made of sand. And even if you can't jump ship, you might not need to find your way home. So I began writing my newer manuscript called Buffalo Girl as I was kind of putting the final pieces in place for Savage Pageant. And Buffalo Girl was very much my way of finding some way home in some respects. This new manuscript explores a very complicated and beautiful mother who immigrated here to the US from Vietnam in 1975 at the end of the American War in Vietnam. And I wanted to write a complicated ode in many respects to her. Simultaneously, while I was writing it, I was also digging very deeply into different iterations of the familiar story of Little Red Riding Hood, which has dozens of different versions and endings, but most of which focus on basically like punitive measures taken against the idea of women's errant sexuality. So I'm going to read a few from that manuscript, and thank you for listening. This first one's called Phylogenetics. When it began isn't clear, but isn't it obvious we always had a knack for stories about little girls in danger? Nice girls, stupid girls, naughty girls, girls bleeding and holding baskets of wine. Each not another route to pity blame the foul. Why not a hard edge for once? Let the girl wander where she pleases. For the moral of the story isn't always the same. And how's the one go where she doesn't die alone and pretty? Where no huntsman comes around to cut her out? Who will answer for the anonymous limb taking? Where once a wood, a rice paddy. Where once a hole, a tooth. Songs of the buffalo girl, wet strands in a basket housing figures that know their way around in the dark. Look now to Little Red Cap, taking all of her known objects to bed, taking off her overcoat to reveal fine downy fur. This next one is called pretty New World Ghost Story. And it's loosely about the house that my mother and her parents and her 6 siblings shared and lived in Southern California on a sponsorship when they first arrived to the United States. And it's called New World Ghost Story. Here lies the house that she traded for blood, that the siblings still fight over. The domicile that repels division. Of course, it would be filled with white ghosts inside and white ghosts outside, calling about the white fence around the way of telling you, this is about the time Nguyen laughed in the face of a ghost that pressed nightly on his chest. He was so full up of it. Terror repeated long enough becomes pure comedy. And what else can you do but laugh and laugh about the time the nuns on bicycles shouted slurs against the new neighbors taking? Or the time I wandered into the backyard and finally knew a dead thing? Or how Nguyen, out of nostalgia and spite, snapped the neck of the chicken he kept right there on the front lawn for our supper without pause, luck unraveling in his raspy hands. On the sidewalk, a pair of mistaken ghosts mounted their bloodied bicycles, mouthed, oh, 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 and fled. This next poem is called The Furies, and I'll just say it contains the blood of the manuscript, the heat, and the very guts of the thing at hand. The Furies. That the Furies sprang forth from the blood of castration. That the confession didn't bring back the hometown. That departure never crossed out the stars. That the word Irenaeus is of uncertain etymology, that most tragic things are. That the punisher of the moral crime, infidelity, murder, must bear the burden. That Eurydice was never asked where she preferred to stay. That the woods obscure as much as they protect, but at least you can lay there. That there are so few public places to exhibit pain. That the image of my mother in Vietnam is a birth certificate that doesn't exist. That I don't know her in her mother tongue. That I don't know my mother's mother in any tongue. That this too means loss. That this too means woods. That I can't talk about that war without my face. That my mother is always worried about her heart. That the violent general is decorated. That most powerful men are sexually perverse. That there's no accounting for punishment. That punishment isn't justice for deletion. That punishment could never be satisfactory, ejaculatory, a pretty show dog's head on a stake. That I'd put it in a book in order to bloodshot my own eyes, brass-studded scourge in my hands. I have about 3 more. Thank you for listening. This next one is the titular called Chu, who is a rumored female Vietnamese warrior in 3rd century Vietnam who resisted for a short time the rule of the Chinese Eastern Wu dynasty. Buffalo Girl. History makes little bundles out of the unthinkable. Young boys carve 3-foot breasts to keep your story otherworldly and ridiculous. A crisp blade slips from view. We stand at the Albertsons customer service and I hold my breath as you ready a well-worn trap. Discount oversight. Grave mistake. A set of eyes exhaust, and I almost feel for our opposing force who does not know the survival of ants under glass. Long after your death, you haunted soldiers' dreams. The Chinese commander that slayed you built fallacies to try to keep you still. Poor men and their fantasies of time and blood that pass only during the duration of war. Victory painted the parking lot lucky red. In every windshield, I swear I saw the glint of slow storm in your eyes. History books are forever. Missing the details of unfathomable loss, providing discounts on overstocked goods. You are my mother, minor warrior, who has never needed saving, who has never needed memory to make a home, a good home, alone in the woods. All right, 2 more. Hungry poem with laughter coming from an unknown source. And I'd like to dedicate this to my sisters. I have 3 of them, 3 older sisters. One of them is like right off screen watching me right now. She's my first audience in person, no big deal. She's like right here. I'd like to dedicate it to her and my sisters. Hungry poem with laughter coming from an unknown source. She's still there the further you look back. I mean, before the war and the wolves and the other war and the French and her departure and even the Chinese. I mean that way back. And since I'm talking about my mother, let's talk a hair down, cat-eye perfection, heels on a borrowed Vespa kind of laughter, filling whole highways with her eyeliner, another kind of laughter, and a deep belly laugh at the thought of the Chung sisters ever jumping from a single thing besides the time it takes my mother to flip the switch on a boring conversation with a dick joke. What did she say? I mean, keep up. I mean that far back, when Vietnam knew a world could be best run by women and more women with still more laughter charging the void, a still life silt, a knitting knot of a lump in the throat, that sensation between choking and uncontrollable heaving laughter at the very thing that controls you and your body and your mother's body and my sisters. My dear sisters. We always had laughter for our bodies that kept planting deeper into the woods. Ground cover. Insert cutscene. Rescind the fairy tale. We all know there are no true villains. We're just a bunch of hungry animals. I would jump with you. I would. I would give it all for you. Laughter at sundown, laughter at the feet-crushing statuary, laughter until our very last word on this dying earth that just keeps turning and turning, its silhouette shadow figure slipping back into human skin at dawn. All right, let's do this last one. When I was about 7 years old, I got hit by a car. I think it was 7, right? I got knocked unconscious. It was pretty gnarly. And I only recently learned that my mother nearly drowned when she was around the same age. And this last poem was written most recently when I heard about that story. And yeah, it's my most recent poem. It's very fresh. It's called Near-Death Experience. Like a huntsman, I catalog my mother's near-death experience. It contains a river, early morning solitude, her curious wandering in a new village as a girl. My grandfather, like all flawed men, was a hero in this story. She laughs when she talks about being purpled by the water, by death's closeness that pressed into her like the image of a dead smoker's lung. We joke most about Nguyen pulling mouth to mouth, the earnestness of recovering loss, the mechanical nature of our bodies, jump-starting. She still can't swim, and I hate the smell of cars to this day. That day, I wandered too far. I remember pretending my bike was a careful automobile, taking speed bumps like lullaby, feeling the ease of squeezed brakes, how tender and human our tools can be, unlike the stony nature of memory sills, or what I hate most, the dark cloak on death's proximity from that moment. A little girl struck by a moving vehicle should be dead, said I looked dead, but I can't remember what color metal hit my temple, can't remember who shouted what, or even the fitting of my collarbone cast a day later. How can I ever be sure we emerged from the deep? How the dark imprints a tiny tattoo in the shape of life's physical humor. I talk my mother into visiting my new home in Florida. I will see her soon. She will say how much closer to death she is now. I have plans. I will pick her up in an automobile that's painted red. I will reserve a day for regarding the big vast sea, near which I've made my home. Thank you.
It was really a burden as a host because I'm trying to write down your lines to bring up later, and then every single line is a line that I'm trying to write down. Jessica, that was phenomenal and bowling over. I'm so impressed too because I feel like Savage Pageant is a book that presents a lot of facts and doesn't lead you to an argument, and you as a reader end up at an argument, and the book just says, yeah, okay, I'm here with you. And the work you showed now has such perspective, has such like a very clear thing to say. The line that I managed to write down was, history books are forever missing details. And I feel like these poems, I'm excited to have their argument in my hands. Thank you again all for coming and sharing your work. I can't imagine a better way to celebrate Heritage Month. And also say like a big fuck you to Heritage Month too. So I'm glad you were all here for that. I guess we're moving into the discussion part. I selfishly want to ask the first question. Something that I noticed in all of your work is, this attention to form. There's a lukbat. And Jessica, you have so many different forms in Savage Pageant. You have, what I thought were timelines, but in fact were like poems in and of themselves, and poems that are also essays in and of themselves, and then also like pieces of prose that are poems and also possibly timelines. Then Ae Hee, like you have a very precise look on the page, but also there's forms that you have like the Dear Bear series, but also in your poems itself, there's a lot of this as this, so things hidden within other things, which I also consider a form. And I just wanted to hear all your thoughts on that thing that I noticed.
we all met beforehand. Was like, you're gonna write this form, and you're gonna write this form, and you're gonna write this form. And we're like, done. I think I think for me, I grew up in the spoken word like scene. I think form is like a game for me. So whenever I get stuck writing something, I think form, besides the loop, but I turn to form as like a constraint to get me like to challenge myself, to see like, oh, this form is gonna try to beat me. I'm gonna try to win at it. To me, it's just like a constraint. I need a constraint, or else I might go all over the place.
Interesting for you to say, it's sort of like a restraint, like a resistance to you, because I also saw in your work, all of your work, is the form was a way for you to resist as well. Like your form was often culturally motivated in some way. Like all your poems, if I can say this, I think have a very personal component to them, at least some of your poems. But in having them in a form, it was either a way to hide that, or to complicate that, or to say like, this is what you think is happening, but in fact, I'm going to offer you a different shape of what that is.
I have a pretty, I guess, cantankerous relationship to form. I mean, I never did like, I confession corner, like I've taught plenty, but I haven't really ever taken formal courses in poetry. Like I didn't do an MFA, my I'm overeducated, but like it was scholarly. And I have always been drawn to poets that create marginalia and kind of explode different kinds of forms that we're perhaps familiar with, and then try to write into those spaces. So I kind of wish sometimes I had a more formal upbringing, but maybe I would have been a much different poet. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. But all to say, like maybe a part of the roveness of both Savage Pageant and Buffalo Girl is in part to my, I guess, willful ignorance in some ways about form, and in homage to a lot of the kind of poets that I've admired that perhaps went rogue in terms of creating weird zines, creating comics, creating newspapers in poetry form, and it's just something I've always kind of been attracted to experimenting with in my own practice.
Yeah, I think we think of form as formalism, but I think when I'm attracted to your all's work is something that Josh said earlier in the author chat, is the queering of forms is something that I find really admirable in y'all's work, and very interesting and very alive.
Yeah, for me, like I think during like workshops and lectures, like I always hear this talk about forms in relationship with like their content, but I think I started also thinking about how these forms had a relationship with me, and how I could like write these forms, or write into these forms, and how these forms kind of like affected me, right? So like I think when I'm writing and I'm thinking of form, I'm just thinking about like, okay, what am I doing here? What is this reflecting of me? And then what kind of conversation I'm having with it. So yeah, I don't know if that answers. It's just some of the thoughts I had.
What I particularly loved, Josh, was your comments on using a Vietnamese form and how American it is to try to make that kind of translation. I mean, I would love to hear more about your experience with that, because I just find that so fascinating.
Yeah, I think when it came down to like my very elementary skill of Vietnamese, and how like speaking it is very elementary for me. I flunked Vietnamese school twice growing up. Shout out to St. Justin Martyr Church and the strict teachers. And yeah, I think I was like, what can I, I took Vietnamese lessons during the pandemic, actually, which is very, very fulfilling. But with the form, I was like, how can I don't know, maybe give back might be the phrase, or how can I don't know, maybe like connect with a tradition that I can't even really write in or speak in the language perfectly. But then, when I started doing, like, because the rules of the Lukpa, it's like it's a 6/8, right? It's 6/8 word, the 6 words, 8 words, 6 or 8 words with the particular rhyme scheme. But then English is polysyllabic, so then I was changing it to syllables, 6 syllables, 8 syllables, 6 8 syllables. But then, I got like, early on, I got like people saying that was cool. I got, Vietnamese people saying that like, I don't know if like this is the right move. And I was like, damn, I'm torn. And that's when that failed poem came into play. But yeah, I'm still grappling with it, wrestling with like the internal dilemma of being Vietnamese American, and how like the Vietnamese part is trying to connect and the American part is like appropriating this form. So it's complicated.
I love that poem.
I think that's fascinating about y'all's work too, is, there's this complication of identity, to say nothing of, Ae Hee, your work spans multi-nations and also spans 3 different languages, and, keep that in some ways I could see as like a challenge to authenticity, but I also think as a statement of the complexity of authenticity as well.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about my relationship with these countries and narratives, and I started thinking about it not so much as like I own them, right? Like appropriating them, as much as like I have a story with them. So once I started taking that kind of perspective, it became a lot easier to write for me.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because while you all are also like sort of telling a story of heritage, you a speaker is also alongside them. Like I think, Jessica, your poem about the car accident, but also your mother's drowning, and then also other people alongside. So like these parallel things happening, I think, create like a really rich sort of a weaving together. We are also past our time, because I wanted to hear so much of your work, and then also hear talking about your work. I want to thank you all again for being here and making this such a wonderful night, and also like it's such a great experience to read your work and then get to see you all perform the work. It feels like a little bit of fanboying, to be truthful. Thank you again to Carolina Poets for having us. Again, we are here every Tuesday, or every second and fourth Thursday. And stay tuned, like us on Facebook and other social media to get updates about our readers. And of course, please pick up our readers' books. Some of them are not yet available for pre-order, but everyone here has a book for you to read. So please find them and buy them from their presses directly or other independent booksellers.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Eric. I'm fanboying too.
Me too.
Definitely, same here.